is CD4Peace.
Feminists have long been attentive to the failure of international human rights laws and institutions to respond to the human rights harms experienced by women and other persons who have been marginalized within mainstream theories and practice of rights. In the same way, the post-colonial critics argued that foundational human rights tests, including the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, do not effectively capture all human experiences. Feminist approaches to human rights compel a radical rethinking of many of the underlying assumptions about the nature of power relations contained in dominant human rights narrative. This is Emanuela and welcome to the 4 Minutes for Peace podcast series. In this episode, we will be delving into another aspect of what we work at here at CD4Peace, which is cultural diversity. Stay tuned to know more about feminism and human rights. In the early 1990s, a time of intense transnational human rights norm-making, feminist movements contested the pervasive idea that women's rights and human rights were two separate fields, largely as a result of the mobilization of feminist civil society organizations. The outcome document of the 1993 World Conference on Human Rights affirmed that human rights of women are an unalienable integral part of universal human rights, and called for a gender equality and women's rights perspective to be mainstream into the work of the international human rights system. 30 years down the track, feminist perspectives are continuing to challenge orthodox human rights theories, methodologies, and practices. Feminist groups from around the world have focused on a wide range of often neglected human rights issues that they believe to be crucial to advancing equal rights and sustainable development. These include the interdependence of socioeconomic rights and civil and political rights, the continuum of gender-based violence from the private to the public spheres, and the responsibility of businesses and other non-state actors for human rights abuses. This discussion has drawn attention to the socially constructed nature of inequalities and to the ways in which power, resources, and accountability must be more equitably redistributed if the emancipatory promises of human rights are to be realized for everyone. Feminist theories and practices have served as a critical counterpoint to hegemonic univocal definitions of human rights. Existing international human rights language have generally been viewed by Western liberal feminist movements as being capable of adequately guaranteeing women's equal human rights. Meanwhile, radical relational and Marxist feminists have emphasized the need for active state regulation of the so-called private sphere and for a greater attention to be paid to the human rights abuses that women experience as a result of their sexuality, maternalism, and labor relation. Since the late 1980s, intersectional and post-colonial feminists have critiqued the failure of mainstream liberal feminist approaches to human rights to adequately observe and redress systems of oppression, racist, colonial, and patriarchal. The critical, contextualized, and practice-oriented approaches promoted by feminist movement in all of their diversity will continue to exert an important influence over the future shape of global human rights. It remains to be seen whether mainstream international human rights institutions are willing to be transformed.
4 Minutes for Peace, podcast produced by CD4Peace, Cultural Diversity and Sustainable Development for Peace, organization established in Geneva since 2018.